have to say Shelbyville has been one of our star graduate communities going on to do what you're doing, but Kokomo has also developed their own group. They've got a Facebook page, Livable Kokomo, and so we're hoping to connect you two at some point in some way to share stories and successes and challenges, because that's really how we learn around the state and from talking to one another all over. So what I want to do today, for some of you it probably will be backing up to Livable 101, but Denise sort of asked me to kind of do a reminder about the linkages between the various things we do and overall livability, because we get hunkered into our trails or our downtown redevelopment or whatever, and we forget about how that all works as a system, or how it should work as a system. So my focus today really is mostly on that system. How do we link all these various things we talk about in livability, but make them turn into something that I call everybody's living room? So I need the, is this it, Denise?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right, so which way am I going?
There.
So I'm going to back up. So I don't really mean literally everybody's living room, but it's a great metaphor for us to think about comfort and space. What makes us at ease? And there's starting to be a lot of really interesting research on happiness and what makes us happy. And there's a lot of that also being done in terms of environment. Where do we feel good? Where do we feel safe, empowered, relaxed, able to interact with people we've never met, people different from us, and not feel fear and feel engaged? You know, what is it that allows us to move around the world with ease? And really, I think that's what livability is. That we're both fostering engagement, but doing that so that wherever that's occurring for us, we feel very at ease in doing it. And there's a lot that design has to do with that. So I call it the city is everyone's neighborhood and everyone's living room. So what I'd like to have you just quickly tell me a few adjectives about your living room. And you can leave out the dirty socks if you have teenagers, but let's just start over here. Really quick shout out. What adjective would you say about your living room is where you want to hang out, why you want to be there? Except don't anybody say TV. What else?
Family.
Family, okay.
Pets.
Pets. Anybody else?
Comfortable.
Comfortable?
Not 90 degrees.
All right.
Have a great view of my beautiful backyard.
All right, a view, nature. Yeah. What else?
We have some lazy boys that we like very much.
Yeah. Comfortable.
It's the opposite of what we're trying to do here.
Comfortable places.
But at the end of the day, we like
Comfortable
them pretty
places
well.
to linger matter. We'll be talking about that.
Our furniture's uncomfortable, so
Oh.
discourage us.
And some uncomfortable chairs, so company doesn't stay too long. What else? Anything else? All right, so those are all great adjectives, great places to sit, natural views, places where we feel comfy, we want to linger, hang out. So that's really what we want out of our cities. So think of, when I use that metaphor of everybody's living room, that's really what I mean by that. So we'll be talking as we go through the slides today about how do we use design to really create that kind of comfortable place for us to be and hang out for everybody in our cities. So I know that I'm going to start because Denise sort of told me I know you've got a lot going on with downtown redevelopment. And it's not unique, even in the small towns we've been around in Indiana, that small town redevelopment is often the start. So especially in Indiana, where we have things like a lot of facade redevelopment funding, we have other transit funding, we have other things that are helping us revive our small downtowns around the state. So it's no surprise that we're starting in those centers because, one, they are the center. It's a great place to start. It's a visible area where residents can relate and feel connected. And many communities where the downtowns have declined, just seeing a visible source of improvement and change is inspiring and helps people think, okay, we can turn this around. So it's not a surprise that it starts in the center. But my message today is really going to be a lot around a lot of city and neighborhood planning sometimes puts local interests ahead of broader interests of community connectedness. So what I really mean by that sometimes civic leaders, developers, business interests are at the fore, and they're focusing most of their efforts on the downtown, which can hinder a broader focus on community connectedness. Not necessarily the case, and I'm not saying it's occurring in Shelbyville, but we just have seen it with the livability movement around the country and around the world, that now people are saying, we have to think beyond the centers. That's a great place, but how do we then move out from the center? So by doing that, it's the only way we can really ensure that the entire community is represented in planning and development of livability components. So it's a great start. And when we do move beyond downtown, we actually find that we can affect transit, walkability, recreation, other key components of livability. So I know I was hoping you guys might be able to read this, but you may not. So you start at the downtown, and downtowns create, again, the center for an identity. They're connected activity, and it may be a hub, but it's only one of what we're going to be talking about today of many hubs. So I'm going to have you be also thinking about where are other centers in Shelbyville. So there's the downtown center, but you also probably have multiple centers. And how do we connect those nodes so that we're one big connected community? But one of the other things that when we start thinking about what I'm calling strengthening complementarity and interdependence, we can connect older and newer neighborhoods. So often, what do we have? Newer developments out, well, in Indiana especially, out by the cornfields. And then we have our older neighborhoods, and then we have those mid-ring suburbs, the first developments that occurred outside of the historic parts of the town usually. So one of the things that we can do by thinking more about this interdependent planning and interconnected planning is that it provides residents a range of choices in housing, culture, physical activity, and more. We also have to think about that in terms of play and healthy activity so that we have opportunities throughout the city that invite people of all ages and abilities to walk, play, and socialize. And when we look at the whole community, not one park or one center or one sports complex, but we think about those as a part of, again, a system-wide connected way of interacting and socializing and being together, then we also begin to address some of these access and equity issues where other parts of the community that may not have a playground or have a very old playground have a chance to be a part of the bigger community livability movement. And that's often not the case. And I actually want to tell you a great story in Kokomo. They have a mayor who's extremely supportive of livability, but I'm going to just use the diplomatic term a little bit less than sensitive, that there might be other really smart citizens out there, some of whom we trained. And so one of our attendees in Kokomo lived in a very old neighborhood with a park. It was a very low-income neighborhood, lots of single parents, lots of transitional housing, but also some very long-term residents. It was an early suburb that had kind of, declined over time, with a playground that she described as prehistoric. And so she kept hearing, you know, the mayor occasionally was in our sessions talking, and finally she said, you know, he just doesn't have a clue. So she drew the park and took everything we had talked about best practices in park design and connecting to the neighborhood and all that, and she redesigned it. And I don't have a picture of it, but I wish I did. She drew the park redesigned with entries from all the various corners of the neighborhood so everybody could connect and walk through the park, connect to the park. It had a walking path, it had a basketball court at one end and lighted play at the other end. I mean, she took it and went with it. And then she said, how do I get to somebody to come and do this in my neighborhood? So that's the question, right? We have to make sure that all those voices in all those neighborhoods are part of our livability conversation. Because otherwise we end up with this great downtown and some great walking paths, but even in Indianapolis, they're struggling to say, why are certain people not using our greenways? Well, they're not using if they're old, they're not using them because there's no toilets or benches. Or the same if they're young mothers with children. Or if the toilet's there, but it's only there and then in the summer months, but you don't really know when it's going away. And it goes away sometime in the fall, but you don't know exactly when. It's a portable toilet. How do you know? So again, how do we look at these things and make them welcoming for everybody? So we're going to be talking throughout the day about this strengthening complementarity and interdependence as we look at livability in our communities. So I'm going to walk quickly through what I consider some of the really key things that make communities livable for all, and then we're going to talk about each in some detail. So certainly livability starts for most people with their neighborhood. And that's one aspect, and we'll be talking about neighborhood design as we go through this. But we also talk about welcoming to all means the quality and character of our public spaces. And I know Shelbyville's been doing some great stuff around thinking about your public spaces. We need convenient access systems that include bike and pedestrian access, connectivity of street and pedestrian systems, transportation allowing ease of movement by a variety of means and connected means. Also, we need to look at the convenient access to libraries, parks, recreations, and schools. And I'm so glad the school people are here today because those are often our neighborhood hubs and have a lot of potential for really being more than a school in our neighborhoods. But they're always a way to anchor families and also our neighborhoods. And so how do we build on those strengths? We need convenient access to local shops and services. And again, we're going to talk about each of these in detail. We need to make things safe for all, including children, adolescents, the elderly, the disabled, single people, families, the homeless. Everybody is in our living room. Respect natural settings and builds on our landscape qualities that we already have and that we can building on our local natural assets, whatever those are. And I had forgotten Shelbyville has the Big Blue River, right? So that's a great natural access. And then building on visible connections to the past while highlighting our own openness to change. And again, I think that's one of the wonderful strengths about these small historic towns around the Midwest is that there's this wonderful anchor to the past and actually to very livable design. We have downtowns with buildings that look onto the street. We have all the things that internationally now people are saying, let's redesign cities like that. So we already have it. And we just have to figure out how to sort of build on that and bring the strengths of those things back into play. So we're going to look at each of these more deeply. And as I go through, please feel free to jump in. You don't have to wait till the end, and I probably don't have an hour and 15 minutes worth of stuff. So, all right, so we're going to start. And again, you may all know this, and I'd love to hear what's going on in Shelbyville. I saw the active whatever that event was. Denise, what was it called?
It was the Get Healthy Here Farmers Market event.
Okay, farmers market, perfect. So public spaces really are one of the, I always love this quote, it's the place we celebrate, linger, meet old friends, encounter new people and experiences. So that might not be the case in public spaces right now, but in great public spaces, that's what happens. So we're really trying to create those things. But again, I think at some point in all of these our communities, especially the smaller towns, that used to be what happened, right, downtown. You went to the courthouse, you ran into everybody you knew, and then you went to the post office, and you ran into some more people you knew. So we're kind of, I say it's nothing new under the sun. We're just kind of saying, well, how do we recreate that? But with our new, the way that our cities are now operating. And even if they're operating with what we're thinking are probably mistakes that we made in suburban sprawl and design, how do we take that and redesign that to get somewhere closer or to approximate that feel that we all enjoyed about connection and having opportunities to meet and gather? So what makes people happy? And we know that these are the kinds of things that actually people say about communities and cities that make them happy. So the true public realm is that portion of our lives in the everyday world which belongs to everybody and to which everybody ought to have equal access most of the time. So that's an interesting way to think about public space, that it's the place where we want to spend part of our time, but we also want to ensure that everyone has access to it. So it's a place where anyone can come, where most events are spontaneous, although some are planned, where people mix with others or simply move about or sit and watch others. Public spaces have no entry fee, no dress code, no script. They should offer surprises and unexpected pleasures. The sight of children playing, youth strolling, elderly chatting, the fatigued resting, the lonely and melancholy or bored escaping their troubles. There are no clear distinctions in a public space between the observers and those observed. All are on the stage, all are part of the audience. So when I look at something like the small downtown to your left, again, we're looking at human space, public space, and I think here, I'm going to have to walk over. You can see people chatting, some people having lunch, some people strolling. But again, nobody owns the space. It's free for people to sit, share, do whatever we do when we need to have a place to gather and sit in our community. So planners say that public spaces humanize a city, and our more traditional cities where they're threatened by the erection of shopping malls and fast roads, destruction of open markets and local services, and where parks and squares only exist in the city center or way on the outskirts, make it challenging for us to create a place where we can meet and chat and engage everybody in all types of activities. One of the other really important things that people talk about these days with public spaces is the importance for children having multiple adult models. That children learn how to be adults by being in public spaces and modeling adult behavior. So a woman named Suzanne, who lives in Oregon and is the head of the International Making Cities Livable organization and annual international conference, Children in Cities is really her specialty. And she talks about what children learn, and there's a lot of research about what kids learn by going and being in intergenerational places, that it's as important as often as what they're learning maybe within their immediate families and environments. Because they're learning how to be around other kids, other teenagers, other adults, other older people. They're learning how to function in an age-segregated world, where a lot of times it seems our kids spend most of their time in a child-specific environment. at school or after school activities or things like that. So it exposes them to more people. So we also look at things like great public spaces promote community involvement and reflection on your local history, and I know that the downtown roundabout in Shelbyville is a historic area, but has needed some maybe rethinking about how it becomes a true public space instead of a car through. And then great public spaces have unique character, they're well maintained, they're inviting, they're close to home, and they have flexible spaces and multiple spots to visit. Those of you who were in the training probably remember when I talk about great public spaces, there's this rule called power of 10 in a great public space, that there should be 10 possible things to do in any great public space. So that could be destinations, it could be a bench, it could be a historic tree, it could be anything. But that there's some magic to having 10 possible nodes of interest in a public space that make them work and make them really engage in. So when you think about a public space, you can, next time you're in a good public space, you can think about that. How do I go around and see, what's here for me to do and be a part of while I'm here? So who uses public spaces? And I want to come back again to the importance of these. We're addressing the needs of urban children and suburban children who often are isolated from a giant public engagement. We enable exercise and socializing for adults and older adults. We're ensuring healthy and social spaces for older people, especially as some of the towns are rebuilding their senior housing in redeveloped historic buildings downtown and things like that. Are we also creating opportunities for people not just to live there, but to feel a part of the life downtown? And then it's a place for play for all ages. And I hate to even bring up the word skateboards, because that always, everybody's like, the hackles go up. But those are our citizens too. And how do we create welcoming spaces? How do we bring those people into our conversation? How do we get teenagers to go around with us and say, what makes this community livable for you? It's not, we really, when I say all ages, all abilities, I really mean that. And a lot of times I think our teenagers are among the people who feel the least connected to the community. So why? Why can't we have them go around on their skateboards and do livability assessments, right? So again, we're meeting people in the way that they live and engage in the community that they're in. But the other important part is vendors and the importance that economics play in public spaces and near public spaces, because it's a great way to think about local engagement. So if you have somebody who has a great ice cream parlor on the outskirts of town, can you help find funding for that person to have a cart, and have a cart downtown, and they have a teenager working there 3 afternoons a week downtown? So we're taking local assets, we're bringing them into our public spaces, we're creating an economy, and we're also creating happy places for people to live. Who doesn't like ice cream? Or popsicles. That's the latest little thing. So
One truck.
yeah, some kind of. I'm sorry. What did you say?
I saw on Indianapolis news stations, they were promoting, and this lady started a wine truck that.
I want that in my neighborhood. I'm always, when I'm biking on some ridiculously long bike rides, like, where is the margarita boy? Really, where's the margarita stop? Not that I should do that on my bike, but it would be nice sometimes to have that. But yeah, those, again, it's, think about how much conversation would happen. When I think about, we're all old enough, and do you guys have ice cream trucks still in Shelbyville in the summer? Somebody who drives around and has popsicles and ice cream? Some neighborhoods. Yeah, when we were kids, that was the thing, right? And all the kids ran out, and then you'd talk to each other, and sometimes parents would come out. But every one of those opportunities is an opportunity to not be in your car and talking to someone in your community. Walking, moving, engaging. So all of those things really make a difference in how we live and interact in our communities. So another really important component of livable communities and communities that are welcoming to all have to do with access systems, and we're going to talk about a couple of these things, and planners, please feel free to chime in here. We have a lot of mixed kinds of developments in our communities. We have true grids, right? So every street, you're on the grid, right? We have cul-de-sac communities. You have any of those in Shelbyville?
Yeah.
Okay. We have mixed grid and cul-de-sac. So one of the issues are that when we have these cul-de-sac communities, especially, connectivity and access are really limited. They were great for trying to create little quiet enclaves for people, but they make it really challenging to get out. I don't know, do you have any developments now where people have trouble getting out and onto an arterial? Some communities do, where there's a big line to get to the arterial because it's the only way out of the development. But all of these things about connectivity and access are related to street design. So whether they're gridded, semi-gridded, or cul-de-sac, they all have different challenges for access and connectivity, but there are design options available to fix those things, to make it better for us to connect. So I always say, imagine you're a child who lives here, and you want to visit your friend who lives here. So what would you have to do to get there on your bike or walk? These are blocks, long blocks. So you're kind of stuck, right? You've got to go out, you're probably going to go down this way, and down this way, and then over here. Whereas without a cul-de-sac, you've usually got either an alleyway, backyard, or just one key street and a cutover street to get to the next place that you want to go. So that's a simplistic version, but they are things we have to think about because they, again, kind of keep us from feeling connected, and our neighborhoods aren't as open, they're more closed. And some people want that. I can't say that's not the case, but it makes it harder for people to bike, walk, and easily connect with people in their communities. So essentially, there are design features that you can do to create better access within as well as without. So if we can figure out how to connect these kind of communities, for example, to a bike path or pedestrian path, you've got to do it in different ways because you're limited by how you can get into the community. But those things, again, you can be looking at in terms of design. I'm not expecting you to become a planner. I'm just kind of putting that out there as an issue because a lot of times we say, well, we can't get those people in that neighborhood to kind of, nobody wants to come. Well, they don't see the connection. There's nothing that's linking them to the community itself. So streets, pedestrians, and biking systems also need to be connected, so they encourage use for daily travel and recreation. So a lot of times we have biking paths are great paths, but they're not linked to our housing, and they don't lead into anything that's also a destination. So if we can make a system that takes us from our house along a path to some sort of destination, and then maybe onto our job or onto our school, then we really have linked systems that encourage people to use that for their daily travel, rather than the special weekend event where I go to the trail. And I always say, if you have to drive to the trail, that's not the point. So it's great, it's better than nothing, but really what we want to do is make it easy on a daily basis for people to use that to get to things they want to do, whether that's work, play, or worship, education, whatever it is. So we need to make it easy. So developing connected access systems to ensure home, to park, to work, or service are easy and designed for all users. Design is supportive and encouraging of the use of the system for daily travel, as well as physical and social recreation. So do you have a Safe Routes to School program in Shelbyville? No? Do any of you know what that is? Okay. So, Safe Routes to School often is from more of your neighborhood to the school, but you can also think about connecting a Safe Routes to School initiative, which is a way to get kids to walk or bike. But think about connecting that up with an existing trail system, for example, where that's possible. So again, it's trying to go from these one-off approaches to thinking about how do they link. So for access systems, we also want to talk about wayfinding as well as how do we navigate our communities. So does Shelbyville have something downtown? Like you're in Shelbyville? I can't remember. I can't remember. Okay. So for locals and visitors, what we call wayfinding, which is essentially just spatial problem solving. It's how do I know where I am and how do I know how to get where I'm going. Whether you're in a building or an environment, knowing where your desired location is and knowing how to get there from where you are now. And for locals and visitors, wayfinding and a clear entrance to the community and neighborhood says, come on in, explore our city or our town. So some communities, for example, might have an archway. I know that in Indiana we're challenged because many of the entryways in our communities are state highways. Mm-hmm. So that's a challenge, just recognize it. But then how do we create other ways then, or even work with the state to figure out signage? I know one of the issues with the state highways is that the state has they have a rule about what the signs should look like, and you planners may know this, but if you had something like this, there kind of have to be this ugly brown, and it's really not very readable. So that requires some negotiation. Can we adapt that to our local whatever scheme we're using to say here you're in Shelbyville? But once you're in the town, having these sorts of wayfinding things really are welcoming to everybody. I might be a new resident. I might be a kid, and I'm learning how to go around now by myself, right? Mom has said I can go downtown on my bike by myself now. I'm 12. It helps everybody, and it gives people a sense of identity. This is my place. This is where Main Street is. This is where the senior center, the library, whatever the key focal points of your community are. And once you have that, then you need to make it easy for people to explore and navigate. So you may have already talked about these kinds of symbols or wayfinding as part of placemaking. I know that you had someone speak to your group maybe about placemaking. But using symbols, arches, lighting, other design feature like these neighborhood flags, mark a clear sense of entering a neighborhood or your city. Think about it even in terms of neighborhoods, so they support identity and a connection to place. But they also can bring art and fun and a sense of pride, as well as welcoming visitors. How many of you would say you know where historic Shelbyville is? Okay, about half. So that's a really interesting thing. Right there, you're in a really small town, and yet only half of you would say you actually could probably define what is historic Shelbyville. So that's where these kinds of things help create a sense of identity that's really recognizable. People say, oh, I know, now we're in historic Shelbyville. or now we're in, I don't know, whatever else your neighborhoods might be. But they're fun, they're engaging, they give people a sense of connection, and they help visitors know where they're moving to. They're also been shown to be extremely valuable real estate wise. So if people know, hey, I'm being shown a house and I've already seen, wow, look, there's all these signs that say I'm in this neighborhood. That means there's neighborhood pride. People feel they're in a neighborhood, not just a city. So there's actually been a link to real estate values and people's perception of real estate in certain developments based on these kinds of identity features. So it's kind of an interesting byproduct of that. So in light of your focus, you may also, in addition to talking about doing these in specific areas, then you want to think about how do we connect those nodes. So if you began to say, okay, we've got historic Shelbyville, we've got, do you guys have other neighborhood places or areas you think about? Can you give me some names? Walkerville,
Clearview,
Clearview, okay. So if you had Clearview, Walkerville, historic Shelbyville, whatever else, then you can begin to think about how do I connect those single identity nodes into a bigger system view of the city. Each one may be demarcated by its own identity and its own aesthetic, but then how is it part of our bigger system and can we connect it all together? So that's really what we're talking about by this complementarity and strengthening a systems view of our town. So in light of our focus on that, are there ways to think about taking this beyond the downtown and includes things like maybe an arts district, a riverfront, some people have an old mill or an old something that's been turned into something new. How do we bring those into, again, a system-wide view that welcomes everybody and is connected? Because right now, is Walkerville a suburb?
Old neighborhood.
A neighborhood? Okay. And is it connected to downtown?
Barely. There are sidewalks. but I don't-
Roundabout ways.
Are they complete sidewalks, Karen?
Okay,
No.
but there's some sidewalks. Okay.
Yeah, they're working on, they have all that in the bike ped
Yeah.
master plan and,
Okay. But it's close to fairground,
Close to the
it
fairgrounds.
will be close to the Blue River Trail.
Got it.
It has a school, older homes with a boulevard kind of effect. I mean, so it's an older neighborhood.
And that's a perfect spot for something like this identity making because, again, if you link it to, we're going to talk about natural assets in a minute, but linking it to, it's adjacent to the Blue River Trail, it's links to the historic district by this path, etc. Again, it begins to be a bigger sense of our community with unique identities within it.
And I've been seeing and thinking of an example because we're blessed today with the superintendent from the Shelby Eastern Schools. But the Mohawk signs,
Mohawk
when you
Trail.
are coming into Waldron from a couple of different directions at least, there are these signs that you are in Mohawk country. or the-
Mohawk Trail.
Yeah.
For a small town, the school and the two churches, that is the hub. That's
Yeah.
where it happens, and the school in particular. And so I'm just thinking of that is that's part of that identity, those signs coming in and, yeah.
Mohawk Trail.
Exactly, yeah. That's a great example. And if you can, the more you can do that within your community so people feel a sense of place and identity in each section, and then how do they link, then that's, again, you're just creating this whole sense of livability throughout the community. So great examples. Yeah, I actually had on here like the Big Blue River,
Yeah.
clearly, and there's trail redevelopment, and so I threw this in just for fun. I hope you can see it from back there, but this is in Siena, Italy, which is an old medieval town, and they have these really whimsical light fixtures, but they're different in every neighborhood. So you know which neighborhood you're in. And it becomes so fun to look for them. So one has a big fish, big blue fish that comes out. And it helps local residents in terms of, you know, they create pride of neighborhood, pride of place. And then in these old, very windy little towns, for tourists, it's excellent because you never know where you are. But, oh, there's the big blue fish. Now I know I'm in so-and-so. Again, I threw that in just as an example because it's another one of those identity, neighborhood identity, but also wayfinding assistance as you think about how do we create that in our neighborhoods.
One of the things in Shelbyville that I found was most interesting, that on the Methodist building, there's a sundial, which is right downtown. And when I say that, people, well, go find it.
They don't know it's there.
Yeah, I was shocked when I first heard it. I had to go find it.
Interesting. Wouldn't that be fun to also have on a livability day or for one of your health things would be to have what do you call it, a treasure hunt? Scavenger hunt for unique Shelbyville. Something like that. And you could have something in every neighborhood that people don't really know is there.
We did that for one First Friday last 2 Octobers ago. It was really fun that every.
They're doing it again this September.
Was it downtown?
But that's just downtown,
Largely
right?
downtown?
It was only downtown.
Right,
Shelbyville.
so you might think
Phoenix
about
downtown.
could I take that out from the downtown so people begin to think that all of Shelbyville is part of their community and that there's unique features in every part of the town. Yeah, great, it's a great thing, and I love that. Where is the sundial?
On the Methodist building
On the
and right on
Methodist.
the circle.
Well, you could even expand it out even more. We talk about so much, but we need to not just think about Shelbyville, but the county.
The county.
And think about all the unique things that we have in the county. So,
Well, is-
And especially as you have
Shelby.
trails that begin to link out of the city, you know, that's a great way to
Let's-
make that.
Get some in the city first.
Yeah, city first, I know.
Shelby County.
So I also know that you guys have had a presentation on complete streets, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on it, but clearly street designs have to be for all users and include not only design, but maintenance of streets and pedestrian pathways. Right now, things installed and all that, but they were like all chipped out and parts missing on one corner. I'm like, who's maintaining this? You know, you couldn't, now a wheelchair or a walker would be like totally unsafe on this corner, and it can't be more than 5 years old. And so again, we do it, but then we don't always maintain it. So we've got to have the whole process as part of our street design, and that's maintenance as well. And the other thing I wanted to say about this.
That's an interesting thing. I just want to add that, you know, the street department received $1 million, thanks to Matt House and Jennifer, but for the complete streets and helping, but they identified all the streets and stuff and prioritized those, and now they have a system of when they go in to maintain those, and we'll continue that action, so.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's great to have money. It's great to get the money. But again, you know, complete streets are meant to make it safe for all ages and abilities to move along and across our streets. And that's all users, that's cars, bicyclists, pedestrians, people who roll. And I use roll meaning wheelchairs, strollers, anybody that's assisted in some way that way. So I'm not going to, again, talk a lot about complete streets, but even on an incomplete street, such as the example here, this is not a street that you can necessarily make a full complete street with all the features necessarily. It's a small neighborhood street. But within the constraints of the street itself, you can at least have full pedestrian connection, not just a sidewalk going one way, but a connected sidewalk path, crosswalks, curb cuts. And again, you may have that as part of your design in Shelbyville, but a lot of times what I see is that along the arterial, perhaps this street, the faster street, there will be sidewalks all the way down, but not consistently connected into the neighborhood. So again, we're talking about that connected system for all users, that everyone feels they can move everywhere in the community easily and safely. And again, I'm not going to talk a lot about roads, but I thought today, there's a couple of examples I thought I would just share with you of some kind of new research, because I think it's so fascinating what we're learning now that we're doing all this complete streets and livability design. We're starting to really see some lessons come out of it. But it's not just that when you slow traffic, so that's a street that has had a street diet, as we call it. So we've taken out one lane that's moving cars quickly through, made a turn. We have some off-street parking. We've narrowed. The benefit of doing this is not just for that street itself. So back in the 70s, one of the first urban planners who was really talking about livability was a man named Donald Appleyard. And at the time, he was looking at how the volume of traffic on a street affected quality of life for the residents who lived there. And for example, he found that the amount of social contact that people had with their neighbors were curtailed for those who lived on the streets with the most high traffic compared with people who lived on streets with lower traffic. No real surprise there, but no one had really looked at that before. But recently, there's been a study done that by the Department of Transportation that says that high traffic on your street isn't the only type of traffic affecting what you think about where you live. So people have found that living near but not on a high traffic arterial can also reduce your residential satisfaction. So if you live 1, 2, 3 streets off of a real high arterial, how many of you would say you do live in that kind of an environment? Do you live within 5 blocks of a high traffic arterial road? That in fact your life satisfaction and residential satisfaction is also less. So why do you think that might be? What do you think might account for it? Any ideas?
There's always sirens going by.
Yeah, you're not immune from the high traffic, the environmental aspects of the high traffic. What else? So it's actually a repudiation of the whole idea that designing communities like the cul-de-sacs, for example, that lack through streets, but are near a high arterial that diverts traffic into these quieter neighborhoods, would in fact turn out to really have greater residential satisfaction. So it turns out that pouring traffic onto inhospitable arterial roads with really high traffic volume where it's hard to turn in and out, sometimes these can be state highways, that these really negatively impact the residential satisfaction of people nearby. So you start to dread, I gotta get out, how do I get out onto that road every morning because that turn left there is so dangerous, or traffic's going so fast there. So it doesn't even necessarily mean you have to live on that high traffic road to be getting the negative aspects of it. Just living within a relatively nearby 1 to 5 block area can actually reduce your own satisfaction. So when we do traffic calming on those high arterials, we're actually increasing residential satisfaction well beyond just right on the arterial or very near. So it's really interesting to me because I hear those stories all the time of people who say, oh, I have to go out of this and I have to try to get on 99 and it's just, people are going too fast and there's no light there and all those things. And it starts to sort of take its toll health-wise and stress-wise on our daily lives. So if you can do this, then you can actually increase quality of life even blocks away from the high traffic arterial. So something to think about as you think about street redesign. Let me think here for a second what I want to talk about without any more this week. So I apologize for consulting my notes, but I've had to every morning say, where am I and who am I talking to today? All right. So transportation, we all know, is the biggest, one of our biggest challenges, certainly especially in the Midwest and across the South. And travel, shopping, and housing choices help create livable communities. Regional connections help us reduce the need to drive. We have transit helps us do community revitalization and placemaking. Transit nodes become gathering places and places that draw employers, for example. And again, environmental and air quality improvements as we get more cars off the road or on the road less time each day. So I had such a reminder of that this morning as I was trying to come down 86th Street, and the lineup of cars to drop kids off at school probably was 3 miles long. Why are those kids all in a car?
Yeah.
I just, it's mind-boggling. And I was this week with someone else, and she said, oh my gosh, you know, the amount of my day I spend in kid drop-off and kid pickup, I could take a course every semester in the time that I do that. So, yeah.
I'll let you know why.
Oh, I know why,
But in Indiana, that we have our tax caps and they directly affect our transportation funds. And so the transportation funds for anybody within a municipality is getting whacked by 50%. So we're cutting bus routes. People say, I'm not waiting an hour to drive to school on a bus. They drive their kids.
Exactly. It's a policy choice.
Yeah, everything's systemic.
And we have to just keep hammering home. I think you're a great group to do that. The health, not just the health of the kid who, you know, is not walking or biking or riding, but the health of all those cars putting emissions into the air for the 3 mile wait. You know, it's the multiple layers of things that I hear it, and, you know, I've been part of the transit movement in Indiana and around central Indiana, and it is a tough go.
I have a question,
But,
and I don't want to harp on the topic, but
No.
within the city limits of Shelbyville, are students allowed to walk to school? I know that sounds like a weird question, but I'm finding in some you can't, so I just was curious.
They can, and I came from a district where we promoted walking to school, but one of the things we wanted to do so that kids weren't walking, especially in the winter, weren't walking in the streets. We wanted to make sure there were safe paths to school. And there are grants out there, but you can have to work with the city to make it happen. So
So you're allowed to,
if
but.
they're allowed to, if you're the superintendent and there's no sidewalks, and kids
Yeah.
will be walking in the street, there's a liability there.
Yeah, that's
The-
what I was wondering. 'cause
the,
I was in a community growing
I
up
know
with more
the Shelbyville High School here, they, at one point that in the middle school had a policy that said, you know, we don't want your kids walking
Yeah.
or riding to school, but that's something that, again, Adam and them are looking at those safe routes to school and working with, the superintendent in the, high school. And so they're working with that and trying to determine
Yeah.
how they can make that happen.
And if you can make it happen one place, so then people begin to see how it can be done, and then you can build some support. And also, those kids and their parents become spokespepeople
Yes.
for, this is great, I can send my kid off, I spend less time sitting in my car, all of that stuff. They become, if you can get one Safe Routes to School project, and you probably know, if you guys are working on this, that you get one, and then it can become really highly visible. Then there's support to help you look for, hopefully, funds to make it happen. And I don't know if, in addition to safe routes to school, you guys know that concept of the walking bus.
Yeah.
But again, you need places to walk. If
And I
you're
would
gonna
just
do
say,
that.
for those of you who have, you know, this is something that concerns you, have some interest in, then I would really encourage you to get with Claire, because that's part of what that change tool assesses. And in the low-income, low-access community that they've been working in, these are all issues. It's an isolated community, and it's not safe for them to walk. They don't have a grocery store they could walk to. They can't safely walk to school. So that's part of what gets identified. And, you know, when the people who make decisions, who are making the decisions about how we spend money, they need hard data. And so the change tool will help provide, isn't that right, Betsy? The change tool will help provide some of that hard data just in this census tract. So just to connect the dots here, some of that's going on right now, and if that is an interest of yours, please connect with Claire.
And Claire is, you wanna just
Claire?
make sure everybody knows who Claire is?
Sure.
That's you.
Claire doesn't know herself, but.
Well, and one of the other things that I've seen that I think is really fun is that, you know, maybe you don't have the money right now to do the sidewalks or do the actual marking formally on the pavement or something. But let's say in that neighborhood, the low access neighborhood, that you have an action day, and over the weekend, the parents paint a walking path in the road, bright paint, arrows. This is how it could work if we walked our kids to school.
Wow, that's awesome.
And get the press there, and people say, wow, you know, it wouldn't take much to put in, you know, even if we used our street, could we calm the street and put in a well-marked path? Use I say the quick and cheap and get visibility. So sometimes people go out on a street on a weekend, and actually, I just saw a great one where they put up, they had signs, so they had taken giant sticky notes, I called them, and put them on the building, and they had brought in an actual bike rack. They were trying to show here's where a bike rack would work, but they couldn't get them to the city to do it, so they said, well, we'll bring it in and we'll show you. So they did, and they put up some signage, and they actually showed how it wouldn't be a barrier to anything. So it's again those kind of citizen actions that maybe sometimes just help people understand. Sometimes people don't want things. I think, was it Shelbyville where we talked about this, that at one point you had trees downtown, and then the merchants didn't like that the tree leaves were falling into something, and so they took down the trees again. I'm like, so they didn't maybe plant the right kind of trees in the first place. So sometimes people say, I don't want a bike rack, or I don't want a light on my corner. Well, here, let me put one up and show you what it would look like. So you get past that barrier of I just haven't ever seen that, and I don't think it's going to work for me. So you can do sort of these, people call them sometimes like guerrilla actions or something like that, where you mark up the street with colored chalk so people can see. If I put a path in front of my store and a bench, here's how it would look. And you can see it's not really, getting in the way of anything or things like that. Sometimes people just have to see it to really get a sense of how it will work in their neighborhood. So again, you all know this, but the benefits of transit-oriented communities, communities reap many benefits, including placemaking. And again, this might be a bigger place than Shelbyville, but transit hubs can become nodes. Again, they can become a public space where people want to linger. Maybe they can get a drink before they take their trip. If it's a transit node that is close to traffic, again, it just encourages pedestrian activity. It encourages people to use local businesses that are next to the transit hub. So I don't know downtown Shelbyville, where your central hub is. Do you have a central bus?
We have Shelby
Go.
Go.
Shelby
and
Go.
It would be operating, I think they store their vehicles behind the Chamber of Commerce, is that right?
Correct.
So that would be the hub from which they take off, but the hub that organizes who goes where when is actually at the senior center.
At the senior center, okay. All right. So again, any place where people are gonna be gathering to get onto any kind of transit, paratransit, anything, you can think of it as bigger than the transit stop. So you can think about how do we design it as a place that while people are waiting for transit, they're doing something else. Socializing, buying a drink from a vendor, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter how small it is. Kokomo's got a really interesting, they have some new transit hubs, and we actually talked to them about one. It was brand new and it was beautiful, but it bordered on this alleyway that sort of cars would come by, and there was a blind spot to see people who were coming over to the transit stop. So our group worked with the city around, okay, how do we put up some signs, some mirrors, and make it fun, so that people there stop and do know that people are gonna be walking across that path to get to the transit stop itself. Because it wasn't very safe as it was designed. Brand new transit stop, gorgeous, but people were still walking across this alleyway where cars couldn't see that people were coming over to get to the transit area. And I think they're also considering having some new vendors or something like that near some of the major stops downtown. So the other thing that having complete streets and good transit stops, transit brings residents to and from jobs, services, and amenities. And the other thing, and it links those outlying employers to downtown and vice versa. So we often think about how many employers do you have that are on the ring, I call it the ring, of your community, within 5 miles or more of downtown.
So many on 44.
Okay, on 44. So again, if there's a transit route that can link those employers to neighborhoods and other parts of the downtown, it's a benefit for both. It reduces traffic congestion, all of that.
We actually have
Yeah.
a lot in the industrial park, and we get phone calls all the time of somebody who's gotten a job at like a Ryobi or whatever, but
Can't get
currently doesn't have a car, doesn't have transportation, and you know, how can we get them there? And unfortunately, even though we have Shelby Go, that's not part of the loop, so that's a, I don't even know, I mean, there are a lot of employers in Morristown, I know a lot of companies, I don't think there's any public transportation that goes out that way, so
Yeah.
that's a definite,
It is,
Yeah.
and you know, Alfonso, I'm just gonna get to your question in 1 minute, but I think, you know, that's been the interesting thing, I think, with the whole Indigo, you know, the whole transit thing in central Indiana. It wasn't necessarily transit activists, it was businesses who were pushing this. You know, it's the airport, it's people who can't get employees to them. So it's a huge partner in that we often, I think, undervalue in our transit activism as we seek to expand routes or think about new routes or even new ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big bus. Could it be some other kind of smaller shuttle that goes back and forth to Ryobi or wherever? But you know, thinking again, how do we make that work? Alfonso?
Yeah, I mean, it was just commented and kind of along the same lines as Angie was stating, and that's what I do with shares, is that I help people find employment. And that is number one limiting factor is the transportation, getting outside of their immediate area if they don't have a vehicle, or they have to depend on someone else for transportation. And, you know, Waldron, I've had individuals that live in Waldron and they can't get, you know, to even Shelbyville, which, I mean, we're pretty much next to each other. And that they still can't, you know, it's really hard.
I think we would be surprised because all of us, I think most of us just drive a car, but is a large population in our community that does not even own a car.
Transit is huge. It's probably the biggest issue in every mid and smaller size community in the country. Everybody is challenged by it, but we can't really talk about livable for all until people can get to the things they need. And it's in our economic interests as communities. These are taxpayers. These are people who work. So it's not that we're doing this to, I think a lot of our old transit thinking was we're doing good for people. We're helping people get, a ride. What we're doing is empowering people to be really fully engaged citizens. And so if, we can't speak out one side and say we don't want to provide public support for people who don't work if we can't get them to work when they want to work. So those are policy issues that we've just got to keep hammering home, and the economic benefits and data speak. So we have to just keep, I think, again, focusing on the economic benefits to our communities when we engage everybody at their fullest potential. That's my soapbox. So. And that's what I always say. Really, livability is about everybody in their community at their greatest ease to their fullest potential for their entire lifespan. And that's what every part of the pieces we're doing should be contributing to that bigger picture. So again, links between transit-oriented communities and health is clear. Transit encourages, and connected transit encourages people to bike, hook onto a bus, etc., go on and on. Helps to reduce obesity, general overall health. We all know these things, and then we know that we can reduce pollution if we can encourage fewer cars on the road. So there's more benefits of transit-oriented communities. Communities that are focused on transit-oriented planning and development also increase choice. So I wanted to talk, I think this is a statistic people probably, you might know intuitively, but when I hear it and I think about my own expenses, it always makes me go like, oh my gosh. So having transit and well-designed communities linked to transit can lower housing and transportation costs. The average American in a transit-rich neighborhood spends 9% of their monthly income on transportation. The average American family spends 19% of their annual monthly income on transportation. And people in an auto-dependent neighborhood spend about 25% of their income on transportation. That's a phenomenal thing. So housing is always first, and it averages, regardless of whether it's transit rich or transit poor, everybody spends about 33% on average. Transit is often the next highest expense in every American household. So think about that when we think about transit neighborhoods and what people could do in terms of affording housing and affording other opportunities if they could reduce their transit costs. So this is a benefit not just to communities, but to us individually. And so we're taking into account, obviously, things like owning a car, gas, maintenance, insurance, etc. But if you're in a transit-poor neighborhood, if you're spending 25% of your income on transit, then that's a big part of your income. Again, transit-oriented communities can help us link older neighborhoods and new ones and contribute to the life of older areas. And when I say transit, I mean the linked transit. I mean transit, trails, etc. So it's all part of that system. This is actually a picture from Kokomo of a mural along a trail that is part of the old, it was actually a railroad, part of the railroad history of the community. But I think it's a great example also of that it's the path itself can be part of the destination, right? So you have something that's really cool, so that the trip itself becomes part of the destination and part of the interest and fun. It can also link, in this case, for example, industrial areas and residential and commerce. So often those sit apart in our more modern design communities. And then again, transportation just has to include transportation for all people with all needs and desires for transit. And so Shelby Go is largely the vans, van size, yeah. Okay. That's what I thought I remembered. So, we're gonna wrap up here quickly. So, livability is also about libraries and parks and recreation and schools. And again, these have to be equitable, accessible, linked to transportation options, and walkable. I think we just talked about this as a great example of a part of the Safe Routes to School design near a neighborhood school. So one of the things that you all who were in the training also know that I'm really big about neighborhood parks. The research shows that if you live within 30 minutes of a park, you're about 45% more likely to exercise 30 minutes a day or more. 45% more likely. So that's a big deal when you're doing health planning. So think about when we look at, what I often like to do is put the parks, you look on your map, and is there a park within 30 minutes of every residential area, and are they all equally maintained, designed, and encouraging of use? So are they all lighted? Are they all safe? Are they all accessible? Are they all maintained? All that checklist of things that make a park really usable. So parks, again, need to be accessible to users of all ages. I don't have my older adult recreation park picture here, but some of you might remember that. There's actually recreational equipment design specifically for older people. Mixing that in with a park with play for older people encourages intergenerational exercise, encourages grandparents and grandkids at the park. Again, thinking more broadly about who uses the spaces and how do we make them interesting and fun and engaging for everybody. And skateboarders. They could be over on another part of the park, linked by a path. But certainly, again, trying to think about who uses the park and how do we get some space in the park for every user, making it really inviting for everybody who comes. Similarly, libraries and other options for lifelong learning should be accessible. Neighborhood locations if possible. I know in a small town, having your good central library is great. But can you have a mobile van that goes to 2 outlying areas twice a week? Or could it be in a mini mall that's dying and you have a library sub-site and help the library reinvigorate maybe some little dying neighborhood area? So a satellite that's there, maybe not open every day, but maybe you have Old Joe Henry's ice cream shop out on Route 44 in a neighborhood and there's 3 vacant buildings next to it. Could you put a 3-day-a-week library satellite there and help invigorate the ice cream shop or the 7-Eleven or the, whatever, and also get people coming to their library to read? So again, I don't ever think these require often huge actions. It's just thinking with what we have, how can we think differently about creating neighborhood-based service and supports and amenities. And again, neighborhood schools, and I know there's all kinds of laws and things about using your schools for other things than schooling. But again, schools are our neighborhood hubs. And I just not really sure of the barriers. They're different in every community around the country, but to having them be our neighborhood hubs. There are some schools being built. I have actually one in my own neighborhood that's being built for in concert with a university. So it was an old declining public elementary school. The university, who has a teaching program, combined with the local school district to build a huge new state-of-the-art elementary school that will have wraparound social services and be a teaching training site for the university education department. So those are the kinds of linkages when we say we can't do it with our tax base. Okay, how do we find some other ways to think about creating something new and something different? So the last thing are really our local shops and services, almost next to last few. I'm gonna really go fast. Again, we want local services to be available, walkable if possible, neighborhood-based, along transit routes, and where possible, even our neighborhood services should foster lingering and gathering, as well as completing our instrumental tasks, doing our shopping or whatever. That's a small street, kind of similar to Shelbyville. This happens to be on a closed street event day. But again, if they're local shops and services, they promote walking, they promote meeting your neighbors and hanging out. And I wanted to just share another fun example of thinking outside the box, as it were, of thinking about neighborhoods and how do we turn local amenities into something else, local neighborhood services. This is an example from Japan. And in Japan, local 7-Elevens, what do we have here besides 7-Elevens? We have K-Go and I don't know, what's in Shelbyville? Circle K's, whatever they are. But in Japan, 7-Elevens are located in almost every neighborhood. And they're now thinking about how they can better serve their elderly population. Japan has one of the fastest growing elderly populations in the world. In only less than a decade, it will be 1 in every 4 people will be over the age of 65. So they're really scrambling to figure out how are we going to really serve this population. So in a Japanese 7-Eleven, you'd find all the same kind of things you'd find here: coffee, donuts, fried chicken. But they're a different animal than our 7-Elevens. Aside from selling things like bento boxes or rice balls, Japanese food, they also offer services that make them the hub of their community. You can pay your utility bills there, buy a concert ticket there, or make copies. So they're similar. They have other retailers like this in Japan called Lawler and Family Mart, but similar, 7-Elevens. And actually, in the aftermath of the tsunami, convenience stores even set up emergency support centers and sent out employees to aid other survivors. So they really are neighborhood-based businesses. So given their growing elderly population, they've begun to actually stock higher quality and healthier food, as well as basic necessities like detergent and toilet paper and light bulbs. And in some, they've actually created new services like home-delivered food. And in some cases, even created seating areas so older customers can gather and socialize and practice their karaoke skills in the 7-Eleven. Karaoke. So, we're not Japan, but why not? What is in our neighborhoods? What is there that provides an economic opportunity for somebody who's got a declining neighborhood business? What ideas could we support to help them branch out, reinvigorate their business? So again, it's just thinking differently about our 7-Eleven or our Circle K. I know in Indianapolis they've been doing a lot of work with the Circle K that's around the Midtown, Mid-North area to try to get them to carry green food, things like that. So again, it's just thinking, like, what could we do with what we have? And do we have some neighborhood-based services, even in Shelbyville or our older suburbs or smaller towns around Shelbyville, that we could reinvigorate with new ways of serving who's living in our communities now, especially our elderly, because you've got a also rapidly growing elderly population in this area as well. So I love the idea of karaoke in 7-Elevens. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to try it sometime because it's too much fun. So can we think about turning our local neighborhood services into something else and also creating small business opportunities in doing that? So we talked about our natural settings and landscapes, so livable communities both build on and use these assets, both as a place for healthy activity, but again, thinking about linking them to everything else. So can we make it easy to use a natural way path to get to the grocery store, to get to school, to get to something else, rather than the thing we do special on the weekend and go out and use the path? How can we link it to the daily life of the community so that it's walkable, usable, and a transit network, as well as just someplace that we go for enjoyment and being in the natural environment? So natural spaces don't have to be remote. You can also think about them as linking a path between neighborhoods, where maybe right now there's farm fields. Is there a way to create a path that links those areas together, so people have a natural, they walk, but also they have some access to the natural environment as they try to get from one place to another? Again, not thinking about it as something always big and expensive, but the small fix that capitalizes on some way that we can get people out and moving about, which I know is your mission. Yeah.
Could I just make one comment that I think maybe we don't want to lose sight of? You know, I get the things that you're talking about, and your point, don't just have them be for weekend recreation. But, for example, I have a daughter who works full-time. Her husband works full-time. They have 2 young children. She happens to live in the Chicago suburbs, so she commutes downtown, but I think we probably have people here that are commuting to Indianapolis. If you're full-time working parents with children, you really don't have time to do any of this except on the weekends. So it is something that we kind of have to not lose sight of, you know, or this.
It's a balance.
While it's wonderful for lingering and, you know, these things, you know, those are all wonderful things to think about, but we also can't lose sight of the practicality for a large number of people. That, you know, that's just not gonna happen. By the time you get home from work and get your kids fed, and if there's homework or, you know, things that, unfortunately, if they would even have time for a walk around the block, that would be great. But, so there's a big section of people that we really need to focus on. It is gonna be weekend recreation for them.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it on the weekend when you have time. I'm just sort of saying, okay, in addition to that, can we think about those as being linkages that we use more than just for weekend recreation? So that's perfect, and I'm glad people do it. But can we work toward linking it somehow so that it might encourage people to use it more than, it depends again on your life and where you live. It's not always easy where people
I
are to
think
walk
we've
around.
taken that in consideration when we designed and planned the East-West Trail, the Blue River Trail. You know, it connects the majority of our homes, but it also takes us into shopping and to some work places. When the other routes are completed, then you'll have some north-south connection too, so they'll be able to go either east, west, north, south, and they'll be able to get to groceries, to, you know, work, to all those different other facets other than just recreation.
And people are at all different life phases, and we do have to recognize, I mean, that there's no getting around that.
Once the one piece is completed, they'll be able to enjoy the river and the natural landscaping. So I think we've thought of several of those things.
Of those things, yeah, yeah. I want to quickly just go through the safety piece and then wrap up. So again, being safe everywhere is critical for livable communities, and safety means different things to different people. It can mean freedom from crime, traffic safety, safety while being in a natural place, right? Lighting and security, but also design that creates what we call eyes on the street. So, creating housing so that instead of our garages looking onto the street, we look onto the street. And our cars are assigned to the back. Creates street safety for kids and street users. Again, they're just all of these issues. Safety around the community, whether it's in a public space, a neighborhood, or on the streets, are all critical for livability. And that also is true for even things like sidewalk maintenance, right? So are sidewalks safe to walk and roll? Are our bike lanes maintained so they're safe to ride as well? So the last thing I wanted to wrap up with is that I think livability really acknowledges connections to the past. So we can build on our past. We can take historic structures, add to them, add new features to them that enliven them and enliven the space while acknowledging the history of the space. But I also think that we also have to look at new voices in the livability conversation. As the demographics of your communities change, then that means that those people, those new residents, need to be brought in to what is livable and how do we design livable communities again that bring in both old and new residents and meet their needs for their livable community, their idea of the living room for all residents, as it were. So I just wanted to leave you with sort of where are you today, and I know there's lots going on in Shelbyville. What would be your takeaway from today? Like what stands out as much of it you know, but what is there anything that stands out to you that would make Shelbyville more welcoming or everyone's living room? And then I know you have your next steps and a challenge for your group. So.